Hello, everybody. Welcome to Focus on Faith. I am Father Edward Beck. My co-host, Chris Cuomo, well, he turned 40 this past week, and he is still recovering. But I have two great guests for you today. The first is Reverend Susan Sparks. She is the pastor of Madison Avenue Baptist Church. She is also a lawyer and a stand-up comedian, and she's now an author. You can add author to this resume. Yay. The book is Laugh Your Way to Grace, Reclaiming the Spiritual Power of Humor. And seated next to her is Rabbi David Ingber. David is the founder and spiritual director of Ramamu, where people from all denominations come together for meditation, yoga, discussion. And that's what we're going to do, have discussion. So welcome to both of you.
Nice, thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Great to have you here. So you both have heard of Eat, Pray, Love. It is everywhere right now. Julia Roberts, and for you, you can talk about Javier Bardem, you were talking about before.
Oh, yes.
That movie comes out. And you know, it's raised some conversation about religious traditions in the sense that basically the book dabbles in a lot of different areas, or Elizabeth Gilbert does in the book. And there's critique about that. Some people say, you know, when you dabble so much everywhere, you're nowhere, or you can lessen your own religious traditions. And I know both of you are eclectic in your own ministries, and I'm wondering what you think about that. Do you think that when you go too far afield, that it threatens where you're rooted, or do you simply see it as enhancing it? Susan, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I would love to jump in on this. I actually did my own Eat, Pray, Love trip between practicing law and going to seminary. Unfortunately, I didn't write the book, which really made me sad, but okay. But what I ended up finding on that trip was rediscovering my own religious tradition through other world religious traditions. I grew up in a very conservative Baptist tradition in my home, and was spent probably 25 years out of the church after that, because it was a tradition I found to be one that was of judgment and shame, and gave a very limited view of God, one that, I don't know, I didn't find very comforting or nurturing. So I left the church. But on that trip, you know, I spent time with a Hindu family. I spent time with Buddhist monks in meditation. I spent time with an imam in a mosque. I spent time, you know, with a rabbi, and I talked about the traditions. And all of a sudden, I started seeing a different face of God, a face of God that was grateful, a face of God that was joyful or thankful or disciplined with prayer. And it brought me back to my own tradition through experiencing the wisdom of others.
So definite a plus for you then.
Oh, absolutely. Okay. Yeah.
Well, I have a similar story, and I love the way that you framed it, Susan. I think that it can be very, I mean, we can either see it as a healing approach, meaning the need to expand our root tradition, or to include more healing images from a toxic image that maybe that we grew up with, or something that really inhibited our ability to even connect with our root tradition. We needed these other traditions in order to heal our own root tradition. That could be one approach. And the second approach, which is also, I think, that I'm hearing from you, and this is my own personal experience, is that it's kind of like a spiritual cross-training of sorts. You know, there is a sense that as the world becomes a smaller place, and we know more about how traditions evolve and how traditions interact with the world, not only is it like healing to have an experience of Buddhism or Hinduism or Judaism or Christianity, but it's actually really instructive in helping to get the most out of my root tradition, is that I cross-train and I'm able to import things that are not, you know, endemic or part of my root tradition. You know, Judaism has a very rich tradition of learning and a very rich tradition of many different things, but it certainly doesn't have yoga. And it's hard to argue that yoga isn't really helpful and healing for the body. So as traditions become stronger in who they are, they feel stronger and more enabled to then go out and reach out and say, oh, can I borrow some of that? And it's not syncretic, it becomes synthesized. And that's always been the way of traditions. If you look at Judaism from the beginning, always the strength of Judaism was that it could import things and make it its own. And I think that it shows, I mean, my own personal experience was that my own healing and my own spiritual path needed to import these other traditions in order to be able to fully engage with my root tradition.
Which is different from, let me play little devil's advocate here. You know, the Roman Catholic Church is known for saying it's the true Christian church. There's a bit of hubris in the way it defines itself, I think, at times. And yet the argument is, if you believe in your tradition and it's true, can there be this leveling of saying it doesn't really matter what you believe or where you wind up, so long as you believe something, it's all the same God, so what's the difference how we get there?
I completely think that there's something called spiritual materialism. I mean, you could be like a window shopper for religion. You can, like, you know, one week you do this thing and the next week you do nothing, and you wear one thing, and all of that is kind of a spiritual materialism that is the shadow, I think, of being willing to integrate. And we're talking about integration here. We're not talking about, you know, willy-nilly, you know, one week I'm a Buddhist and the next week I'm a Taoist and the next week, you know, that's not it. It's kind of like, how do I integrate these things into a perspective and a path that is compassionate and loving and increases our sensitivity towards other human beings.
Because we have to believe that people in other religious traditions who've had centuries of practicing these religious traditions have some truth and some revelation that we can benefit from.
Absolutely. Right? I mean, what is this thing? We're all standing at the base of the mountain climbing from different perspectives, but we're all going in the same place. And the, you know, the wonderful truths that come out of Hinduism or Buddhism or Judaism or Islam, you know, these are traditions that they don't conflict, but they parallel. To me, Christianity, they parallel it, they enrich it, they lift it up, and so it allows us to see it in a global view as opposed to some very limited, myopic view that I think many times Christians tend to do.
Absolutely.
So David, what about Eat, Pray, Love? First of all, have you read it?
Yes.
You have read it, because it's kind of been getting the label of a woman's book. It's going to be a woman's movie. I mean, you're going to go see the movie?
I probably will. I think my wife is going to. Maybe Javier, my wife, wants to, you know, go see it. Yeah, I think it's an interesting. You know, listen, it's going to really. People are going to love it, and I think it's because it speaks to a zeitgeist. It speaks to something that is present in our culture, and her story, you know, is the story of many people. It's my story in many ways. It's your story in many ways, and I think that in that sense, it's really speaking, as art does, for the culture at large. And it speaks to a seeker's mentality, although I do think that the seeker mentality is a little bit giving way to a homesteader mentality, meaning I think that what people sought, you know, the kind of Elizabeth Gilbert character, her character seeking all of these different things, in our generation now is actually people wanting to bring that back into their root tradition. I think that that's kind of the way things have been going. That's kind of the arc of things. So, okay, I tried a Buddhist retreat for a weekend. I tried a Sufi retreat. You know, I did yoga, you know, I did my Ashtanga, whatever it is, but now I want to find that in my Christianity. I want to find that in my Judaism. So I think that, you know, the movie I think it's going to speak to a lot of people, but I think that really what we're seeing is the post-movie phenomenon, and really is where our culture is, and kind of the movies are catching up to it.
Yeah. You know what, the questions I'm getting from my congregation and other people are, how do you do an Eat, Pray, Love and not go to India? Because I don't have 10 grand in 3 weeks or 3 years or whatever else. And so there's an interesting conversation about, well, what actually happened and how do you do that? You know, in the end, she really just found herself. You know, she found herself in a new lens. She found herself in a new way. And I think it's a matter of kind of jarring ourselves loose in our own homes, in our own places. You know, it's like a root-bound plant. It can't get nourishment anymore. It can't absorb water. Sometimes you have to just lift it up, shake it out a bit, put it in a bigger pot, and give it a little room to grow.
It's an interesting perspective. And we're going to kind of shift gears a bit. We're going to take a short break. And when we come back, I don't know if you've heard, but there's been this study about clergy. Clergy people like us being overstressed, overworked, not living healthily. We're going to talk about the implications of that and what we all think about that. So stay with us. You're watching Focus on Faith.